There's a knock at the door, sharp and unexpected. It's a Monday evening, the kind of night that usually drifts by uneventfully in our house. Dinner plates are still on the table, and the kids are upstairs, arguing over homework or Fortnite. Becky is in the kitchen, humming something while wiping the counters. The knock comes again, more insistent this time. I answer it, expecting a neighbor or some kids selling raffle tickets. Instead, there's a man standing there, gray suit, clipboard in hand, and a look that says he doesn't want to be here either. "Mark Lewis?" he asks. "That's me." He hands me a large, cream-colored envelope, sealed and thick with papers. "You've been served," he says flatly, and before I can respond, he turns on his heel and walks away. My first thought is, this has to be a mistake. I'm not in any legal trouble. I don't even jaywalk. I glance at Becky, who's staring from the kitchen with her dish towel frozen in her hand. She looks as confused as I feel. I shut the door and open the envelope right there in the hallway. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. In the matter of Rebecca Lewis and Mark Lewis, notice of dissolution of marriage. A divorce filing. For a second, my brain refuses to process what I'm seeing. I glance up at Becky, waiting for her to laugh, to say it's some kind of bizarre joke. But she doesn't. Instead, she drops the dish towel and steps closer, her face pale, her mouth opening and closing like she's searching for words. "What the hell is this, Becky?" My voice comes out louder than I intend. I was going to tell you," she stammers, her eyes darting everywhere but at me. "Tell me what? That you're blindsiding me with a divorce? What is this, some kind of prank?" She shakes her head, and there's something in her expression now, guilt. Not the kind that comes from springing bad news on someone. A deeper guilt, like she's been caught. My stomach tightens. "I didn't mean for it to come out this way," she whispers, her voice trembling. "Then how the hell did you mean for it to come out, Becky?" My mind races, trying to connect dots that aren't even there yet. You don't just wake up one morning and decide to drop divorce papers on your husband. What's going on? She doesn't answer, but her silence is louder than any explanation. And that's when it hits me, she isn't blindsiding me because she's unhappy. She's blindsiding me because there's something else. Something worse. For the first time in our marriage, Becky looks like a stranger to me. And for the first time, I'm truly afraid of what's coming next. The air felt heavier in the house after that moment. Becky and I stood there, a divorce filing in my hand, her silence screaming louder than any confession. The kids were still upstairs, oblivious to the tectonic shift happening beneath them. "What's this really about?" I asked, my voice calmer than it should have been, given the circumstances. "You want out? Fine. Just explain to me why you didn't talk to me first. Why am I finding out like this?" Her lips tightened, and she wrapped her arms around herself like she was trying to hold something in. "It's complicated, Mark," she finally said. "Complicated?" I barked a short, humorless laugh. "That's all you've got? I've been married to you for 16 years, Becky. Complicated doesn't even scratch the surface." "I didn't want it to come out like this," she said again, her voice wavering, her eyes darting everywhere but at me. It's better if we end this now." Something inside me snapped. "You know what? No. It's not better if we end it now. You don't just destroy a marriage with a piece of paper and walk away without explaining why. I deserve to know." For a moment, she looked like she was about to break down. Tears welled in her eyes, and I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then she steeled herself, shaking her head as if she'd made up her mind. "I can't, Mark," she whispered. "Not now. Not like this." Before I could respond, she turned and fled up the stairs, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. The next few days were a blur of awkward silences and forced interactions. Becky pretended nothing had happened, throwing herself into her usual routine of school runs, errands, and making dinner. But she avoided me like the plague. Every time I tried to bring up the divorce papers, she'd deflect, claiming she wasn't ready to talk about it. I couldn't just sit back and wait for her to decide when she was ready to explain. Something didn't add up, and I wasn't going to let her keep me in the dark. So, I did what anyone in my position would do. I started digging. It began innocently enough. I thought if I could just find a clue, a hint of what was really going on, I might be able to piece together the puzzle. I searched through her email one night while she was out grocery shopping, but everything seemed normal. Bills, PTA updates, online shopping confirmations, nothing unusual. But then I checked her calendar. That's when I noticed it. She'd marked every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 2 months as gym/errands. Nothing odd about that, she'd always been good about taking care of herself. But there were no receipts, no new workout gear, and no gym bag lying around. If she wasn't at the gym, where was she going? I decided to follow her. Thursday morning came, and Becky left the house at her usual time. I told her I was working from home that day, but the moment she backed out of the driveway, I grabbed my keys and tailed her. She drove across town, heading to the industrial district, where small office buildings and storage units lined the streets. I hung back, watching as she pulled into the lot of a plain, nondescript building with tinted windows and no visible signage. Becky got out, wearing jeans and a casual top, definitely not workout clothes, and disappeared through the door. I waited. 20 minutes turned into 40, then an hour. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this some kind of secret job? A side hustle she hadn't told me about? Or was it something worse? Finally, she reappeared, but she wasn't alone. A man walked out with her, a guy in his early 40s, dressed in a button-down shirt and slacks. They talked for a moment, too far away for me to hear. Then he leaned in, placing a hand on her lower back as he said something that made her laugh. My stomach churned as I watched them linger, his hand not moving, her body language relaxed and familiar. When they finally parted, Becky got back in the car and drove home like nothing had happened. I stayed in the lot, staring at the building, trying to decide my next move. That night, I couldn't hold back anymore. As soon as the kids were in bed, I confronted her. "Where were you today?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though my insides were anything but calm. She froze for a split second, then recovered quickly. "What do you mean?" "I was running errands." "Don't lie to me, Becky." "I followed you." Her face went pale, and for the first time in days, she met my eyes. You what?" "You heard me. I saw you at that building. I saw you with him." My voice was rising now, the anger bubbling to the surface. "Who is he, Becky? What's going on?" She didn't answer, just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like she was struggling to find the right words. "Is that why you filed for divorce?" I pressed. "Because you're cheating on me with some guy from the industrial district? Is that it?" Her eyes widened in shock. "No. Mark, it's not like that." "Then what is it?" I demanded, stepping closer. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're throwing away our marriage for someone else." She shook her head furiously, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand," she choked out. "It's not what you think." "Then explain it to me," I said, my voice cold. "Make me understand, Becky." She hesitated, wiping her tears with trembling hands. I can't." I stared at her, the anger giving way to a cold, sinking feeling in my gut. "Can't or won't?" When she didn't answer, I turned and walked out of the room. If she wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. And deep down, I knew I wasn't going to like what I found. After that night, I couldn't look at Becky the same way. Every interaction felt fake, every smile forced. She tried to act normal, but I wasn't buying it. The way she avoided my eyes, the nervous way she moved around the house, it only confirmed my suspicions. But she wasn't giving me the truth, and I couldn't let it go. Not after seeing her with that man. I needed to know who he was and what he meant to her. If she wasn't going to tell me, I'd find out another way. The following Tuesday, I followed her again. Same building, same car, same man. This time, though, I didn't stay in the car. I parked down the street, waited until they went inside, and then approached the building. The door was locked, but a small sign next to it caught my eye: Arrowhead Consulting, by appointment only. Consulting? It didn't explain much, but it was something. I wrote down the name and resolved to dig deeper. That night, after Becky went to bed, I stayed up researching. A quick online search turned up a sparse website for Arrowhead Consulting. They offered personal and professional growth services, which could mean anything. But there was one page that stood out: a list of staff members. There he was, David Carter, lead consultant. His picture confirmed it was the same man I'd seen with Becky. His bio described him as a relationship specialist with over 15 years of experience helping individuals navigate life's challenges. My stomach turned as I read the last line: specializing in discreet, personalized support. Discreet. The word stuck in my mind like a thorn. The next morning, I confronted her again, this time with everything I'd found. "You've been seeing a relationship specialist," I said as she poured coffee in the kitchen. My voice was calm, but my heart was racing. She froze, the coffee pot trembling in her hand. "What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, Becky." I looked him up. David Carter. Arrowhead Consulting. "I know you've been meeting him twice a week." Her face drained of color, and she set the pot down carefully, as if afraid it might shatter. "Mark, it's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." She took a deep breath, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Finally, she sighed and turned to face me. "It's therapy," she said quietly. "Therapy?" I repeated, incredulous. "What kind of therapy involves meeting some guy in secret and lying about it to your husband?" "I didn't lie," she snapped, her voice rising. I didn't tell you." "Same difference, Becky. You've been sneaking around behind my back, meeting this guy. And for what? To talk about how much you hate being married to me?" Her eyes widened in anger. "It's not like that, Mark. I went because I needed help. I needed someone to talk to. Someone who wouldn't judge me." "Judge you for what?" I shot back. She hesitated, her lips trembling. "For feeling trapped," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Trapped?" I repeated, the word stinging like a slap. "In what? This marriage? Our life? What exactly has you so trapped, Becky?" "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay." "Pretending?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean like pretending we had a good marriage? Pretending you loved me?" Her silence was deafening. The argument spiraled from there, each of us throwing accusations and grievances at the other. I told her how betrayed I felt, how her secrecy made me question everything about our relationship. She told me how unhappy she'd been, how she'd felt ignored and unimportant for years. "You think this is my fault?" I demanded, my voice rising. "I'm not saying it's your fault," she shot back. "I'm saying it's complicated. Marriage is complicated, Mark." "Don't give me that," I said coldly. "If you were unhappy, you should have come to me. You don't fix a marriage by sneaking around with some stranger." "I wasn't sneaking around," she yelled. "I was trying to figure out how to fix things without hurting you." "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "Because you failed." She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. I wanted to feel sorry for her, but I couldn't. "Not after everything. Why didn't you just talk to me?" I asked quietly, my anger giving way to exhaustion. She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "Because I didn't know how," she said. "I was afraid of what you'd say. Afraid you'd hate me." "Hate you?" I shook my head. "Becky, I don't even know who you are anymore." That night, I slept on the couch. The house was eerily quiet, the kids sensing the tension but not daring to ask what was wrong. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to the story. Becky's explanation didn't add up. Therapy or not, she was hiding something. And I was determined to find out what. I couldn't stop. The confrontation with Becky left me restless and unsatisfied. Her tears, her words, they all felt hollow. Therapy? Feeling trapped? None of it explained the divorce filing or why she hadn't come to me sooner. People don't just destroy their lives over vague feelings. There was more to this, and I wasn't going to let it go. I spent the next few nights digging deeper. Becky might have been trying to bury the truth, but she underestimated how determined I could be. She was careful, but nobody is perfect. People leave trails. It was Thursday evening, 2 days after our argument. Becky had gone to bed early, saying she had a headache. I waited until I heard the faint rhythm of her breathing before I started my search. Her phone was locked, no surprise there, but she wasn't as cautious with her laptop. I booted it up, knowing she rarely logged out of anything. At first, I didn't find much. Emails, social media accounts, calendar appointments, all of it seemed mundane. But then I noticed a folder tucked away in her cloud drive labeled Work Docs. Becky didn't have a job, so the name was odd. I opened it, expecting nothing. What I found was the beginning of the end. The folder contained screenshots of text conversations. Hundreds of them, saved meticulously by date. At first, I thought they were related to her therapy sessions, maybe notes or personal reflections. But as I started reading, my chest tightened. These weren't notes. They were messages between Becky and David Carter, the man from Arrowhead Consulting. The earliest messages were almost professional, like a client talking to a service provider. Becky, thank you for meeting with me. I'm not sure where to start, but I need someone to talk to. David, that's what I'm here for. Take your time. But as I scrolled further, the tone shifted. The texts became more frequent, more personal. They weren't just discussing her feelings anymore, they were sharing details about their lives. David wasn't just her therapist, he was something else entirely. Becky, I feel like I can tell you anything. Mark wouldn't understand. David, you don't have to justify your feelings to anyone, Becky. You deserve to be heard. It got worse. Messages turned into flirtations, and flirtations turned into confessions. By the time I reached the latest conversations, there was no denying the truth. Becky and David weren't just talking. They were meeting outside the consulting office. Becky, I can't stop thinking about last night. I hate sneaking around, but I don't regret it. David, neither do I. I wish we didn't have to hide. My blood ran cold as I pieced it all together. She hadn't just been confiding in him, she'd been sleeping with him. While I was at work, while our kids were in school, Becky was with another man. I confronted her the next morning. Who is David to you? I asked, cornering her in the kitchen. She froze, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. I already told you. He's a therapist. No, he's not, I said, holding up my phone. I'd taken screenshots of her messages. Stop lying to me, Becky. I know everything. Her face went pale as she stared at the screen. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, spin another story. But then her shoulders slumped, and the fight went out of her. How long? I demanded. Mark. How long have you been cheating on me? She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. 6 months, she whispered. 6 months. Half a year of lies and betrayal. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger in check. Why, Becky? Was it the thrill? Did I do something wrong? What made you throw away everything we built? It wasn't like that, she said, her voice trembling. It just happened. Bullshit, I snapped. You don't accidentally sleep with someone. You chose this. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said, tears streaming down her face. I was lost, Mark. I needed someone to talk to, and he listened. He made me feel understood. Understood? I laughed bitterly. You could have come to me. I would have listened. I'm your husband, for God's sake. I didn't think you'd understand, she said quietly. You're always so practical. You don't talk about emotions, Mark. You don't open up. And that's your excuse? I shot back. That's why you slept with him? It wasn't just about that, she said, her voice rising. I've felt alone for years. You think being married means everything's fine, but it's not. We haven't been okay for a long time. I stared at her, stunned. You think I haven't noticed? I knew something was off, Becky, but I thought we'd work through it. You never gave me a chance. Instead, you ran to someone else. She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I didn't mean to hurt you. Well, you did, I said coldly. And you didn't just hurt me. You hurt our family. You hurt our kids. Was it worth it? Her silence was all the answer I needed. That night, I packed a bag and left. I couldn't stand to be in the same house as her. I needed time to think, to figure out what to do next. Divorce seemed inevitable, but the thought of breaking up our family made me sick. As I drove aimlessly through the city, my mind raced. I'd always thought of myself as a good husband, loyal, dependable. But was I part of the problem? Had I been so focused on providing for our family that I'd neglected the emotional side of our relationship? None of that excused what Becky had done. But it made me realize that if we were going to move forward, together or apart, I needed to face the truth about myself, too. The next step would be the hardest, deciding whether to fight for our marriage or let it go. And whatever decision I made, I knew there would be no going back. The night I left, I stayed at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions, which was good because I didn't have answers to any of my own. The room smelled like bleach and stale cigarettes, but I didn't care. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. Becky's name glowed on the screen. She had texted me twice and called 3 times. I didn't open any of it. I wasn't ready to hear more excuses or sob stories. Not yet. Instead, I started planning. The next day, I called a lawyer. If Becky wanted a divorce, I'd make sure it wasn't on her terms. It wasn't just about splitting assets, it was about protecting what mattered most, our kids. I wasn't going to let her reckless choices uproot their lives more than they already had. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Amanda, asked me to come in that afternoon. Her office was sterile and intimidating, with shelves full of leather-bound books that screamed authority. I need to file for divorce, I said, wasting no time. She nodded, jotting down notes. Do you have any evidence of infidelity? Yes. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots of Becky's messages with David Carter. Amanda's face hardened as she scrolled through them. This is good. Pennsylvania is a no-fault divorce state, but adultery can still influence things like alimony and custody. Have you confronted her? Yes, she admitted it, I said. She's been seeing this guy for 6 months. Amanda leaned back in her chair, studying me. What do you want, Mark? Custody? The house? What's your goal here? I want custody, I said firmly. My kids don't deserve to be caught in the middle of this. And I want the house. Becky can leave if she wants to be with him. Understood, Amanda said. But remember, the court will look at what's in the best interest of the children. If you want full custody, you'll need to show that you're the more stable parent. That won't be a problem, I said. Becky's the one who broke this family, not me. After the meeting, I drove home. I hadn't planned on going back so soon, but there were things I needed to get: clothes, documents, a sense of normalcy. Becky was in the kitchen when I walked in, her face a mix of relief and apprehension. Mark, she said, her voice tentative. I didn't know if you were coming back. I'm not staying, I said flatly. I came to get some things. She looked like she wanted to say more, but I cut her off. Don't. I don't want to hear it. As I headed upstairs, she followed me. We need to talk about this, she said. No, I said, turning to face her. What we need is a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce, Becky. This is over. Her face crumpled, but I didn't stay to watch. I packed what I needed and left. I wasn't done with David Carter. The thought of him smugly continuing his life while mine was in shambles made my blood boil. He was just as guilty as Becky, if not more so. He had taken advantage of her vulnerability, or so I told myself to keep from hating her completely. That evening, I made another call, this time to Arrowhead Consulting. A woman answered, cheerful and professional. Arrowhead Consulting, how can I help you? I need to speak with David Carter, I said. May I ask who's calling? Mark Lewis, I said. Mr. Carter is with a client right now, she said. Can I take a message? No, I said. I'll come by tomorrow. I hung up before she could respond. The next day, I arrived at Arrowhead Consulting unannounced. The receptionist looked startled but recovered quickly. Mr. Lewis? That's me, I said. Mr. Carter is in a session. I'll wait, I said, taking a seat in the small waiting area. About 15 minutes later, the door opened, and there he was. David Carter. He froze when he saw me, his eyes narrowing slightly. Mr. Lewis, he said cautiously. We need to talk, I said, standing. He glanced at the receptionist, then back at me. I have another appointment. No, you don't, I said firmly. This won't take long. He hesitated, then gestured for me to follow him into his office. The room was decorated to put people at ease, neutral colors, soft lighting, a couple of inspirational quotes on the walls. It didn't work on me. What can I do for you? He asked, sitting behind his desk. You can stay away from my wife, I said, my voice low and steady. His expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of something guilt, maybe, cross his face. Mr. Lewis, he began, I understand you're upset, but... Upset? I interrupted. Upset doesn't even begin to cover it. You've been screwing my wife for 6 months while pretending to help her. Do you have any idea what you've done to my family? I didn't force her into anything, he said, his tone defensive. No, but you sure as hell encouraged it, I said. You call yourself a therapist? You're a predator, plain and simple. Mr. Lewis, I think you should leave, he said, standing. Not yet, I said. Here's how this is going to work. You're going to end whatever you think you have with Becky, and you're going to stay far away from my family. If you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are. Your clients, your colleagues, hell, I'll plaster it all over town. You'll never work again. He stared at me, his jaw tight. You can't prove anything. I smiled coldly. I have the messages. Every last one of them. Do you really want to test me? For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he nodded, his shoulders slumping. Fine. It's over. It better be, I said, turning to leave. Driving away, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. It wasn't enough to undo the damage, but it was a start. David Carter wouldn't ruin another family, not mine, not anyone else's. Now, I just had to figure out what to do with Becky. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and tense exchanges. Becky moved into the guest room, and we only spoke when it was absolutely necessary, arranging schedules for the kids, dealing with house expenses, or answering questions from the lawyer. For the most part, we avoided each other, the silence in the house broken only by the sounds of Tyler and Ella going about their routines. I thought I'd hit my lowest point the night I found those messages, but every day since then felt like a new kind of pain. There's no manual for what to do when the person you trust most in the world betrays you. It was the kids who kept me grounded. Tyler was old enough to pick up on the tension, though Ella seemed blissfully unaware, or perhaps she was just better at hiding it. I kept telling myself I was doing this for them, that ending things with Becky was the best way to preserve some sense of stability in their lives. But part of me wasn't sure I believed it. One night, after the kids were in bed, I finally decided to confront Becky, not with anger or accusations, but with the conversation we'd both been avoiding. I needed closure, and I needed to understand what had gone so wrong between us. She was sitting in the kitchen, staring into a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Her eyes were puffy, and she looked as exhausted as I felt. "Can we talk?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She glanced up at me, hesitant, but then nodded. "Yeah." I sat across from her, the table between us feeling like a chasm. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then I broke the silence. "Why didn't you come to me?" Her brow furrowed, and she looked down at her tea again. "I don't know," she said softly. "I guess I was afraid. Afraid you wouldn't listen, or that you'd think I was being ridiculous." "Ridiculous?" I repeated, incredulous. "Becky, we've been married for 16 years. How could you think I wouldn't care about how you were feeling?" She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Because we stopped talking a long time ago, Mark. Not just you, not just me, both of us. We fell into this routine where everything was about the kids, the house, the bills, but not about us." I wanted to argue, but deep down, I knew she wasn't entirely wrong. "So you turned to him," I said, my voice tight. She winced, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't plan for it to happen. I swear, Mark, I didn't wake up one day and decide to destroy our marriage. I was just lonely. And David, he listened. He made me feel seen." "And I didn't?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Not in a long time." Her words hit harder than I expected. For all my anger and hurt, I couldn't ignore the truth in them. Somewhere along the way, we had lost each other. I'd been so focused on providing, on being a good husband and father, that I hadn't noticed how disconnected we'd become. "That doesn't excuse what you did," I said finally. "I know," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I know I ruined everything, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I didn't stop loving you, Mark. I never stopped loving you." I wanted to believe her. Part of me even wanted to forgive her. But the damage was too great. "You should have come to me," I said. "Even if you thought I wouldn't listen, you should have tried. You owed me that much." "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I failed you. I failed us. And I hate myself for it." We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of everything we'd lost hanging heavy in the air. Finally, I spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about what happens next," I said. "Not just for us, but for Tyler and Ella." She looked at me, her expression a mix of hope and fear. "I'm not going to fight for full custody," I said. "The kids need both of us, and I'm not going to take that away from them. But I want primary custody. They'll stay here, in the house, and you can have visitation. We'll work out the details with the lawyers." Her face crumpled, and she nodded. "Okay. And as for the house," I continued, "I'll buy out your share. You can use the money to get a fresh start." "Mark," she began, but I held up a hand. "This isn't about punishing you," I said. "It's about protecting the kids. They need stability, and I'm going to give it to them." She nodded again, wiping her tears. "You're a good father, Mark. Better than I deserve." I didn't respond. I wasn't doing this for her. The next morning, I called Amanda and told her to start drafting the custody agreement. Becky and I broke the news to the kids that evening, keeping the details vague but assuring them that we both loved them and that nothing would change for them. Tyler took it hard, but Ella just asked if she could still go to her friend's house that weekend. After the kids went to bed, Becky packed a bag and left. She said she'd stay with her sister until we worked out the logistics. As I watched her car pull out of the driveway, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. This wasn't how I imagined my life turning out, but it was the hand I'd been dealt. Over the next few weeks, I focused on the kids, on work, and on rebuilding my life. Becky and I communicated only through our lawyers, and while the process was painful, it was also necessary. One night, as I sat in the living room with Tyler and Ella, I realized something. For the first time in a long time, the house felt peaceful. It wasn't the life I'd envisioned, but it was mine. And I was determined to make it a good one. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Becky and I parted on civil terms, if not friendly ones. She moved into a small apartment nearby, and we settled into a co-parenting arrangement that, while not perfect, worked well enough. Life went on. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of everything threatened to crush me. But I kept going, for the kids, for myself, and for the future I was still building. Because no matter how broken things seemed, I refused to let this define me. I would rebuild, piece by piece, and come out stronger on the other side.